Meet you.
And you? Oh, hello. Meeting is being recorded. So that just popped up. Sorry, Maria. Yes, good to meet you too. In person, which is great.
I know. Exciting trait.
Yeah, we've exchanged emails, and nice to see you, because that's one of the I suppose the downsides of the whole pandemic is that people who are relatively new to Notwicks or new to Kindred, and in the last 12 months, it's been hard to actually speak in person. But now, now the light is shining brightly that we could be going back to
what a difference
in-person meeting.
It is a huge difference. I'll take it. I'll take everything today.
Just walking around yesterday, just like, can't the weather always be like this?
Yeah.
I know. Yes, that's the other bright light. So, how are things, Maria?
Good. I was just saying, we had the good fortune of moving over December 11th, just in time to quarantine for lockdown. And then we got COVID my first week of work in February. So like the entrance into the UK was not what I was hoping for, but now things are good. You know, things are opening up. There's sunshine. I met a founder this morning in person. Things are looking good.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Future is rosy. Thank you for taking the time and apologies for keeping you slightly waiting on my side. And sort of, yes, as I mentioned, we've not met in person, but I've come across Kindred through Chris, is my main connection, who I knew way back when I was at Bloomberg. He was at Amazon, I think Web Services, and then obviously left to kind of build Kindred. And I suppose actually before we go into Kindred, because I suppose we've not really had a chance to meet, as I've said. I'm just curious, the Kindred pre-life, so to speak. If you could maybe fill in people, and that'd be a great start.
My background, I'll bring you from Beaver Dam, Wisconsin to London, right? So grew up in Wisconsin, studied industrial engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, go Badgers. I spent the first 4 years out of undergrad working for GE Healthcare in supply chain operations. So they had these rotational programs where you would switch jobs every 6 months for 2 years. Loved it. Honestly, learned so much about leadership and people and teams, and they throw you into the fire. So I was like a shop floor supervisor for 1955-year-old manufacturing line union employees. One of my first, I was like 22. And so you quickly learn from really good mentors around you how not to be the worst manager ever, because I screwed up at first, for sure. And then I was there during the financial crisis of 2008. And so ended up being there when they were taking a lot of base cost out. And so they were moving a lot of manufacturing abroad. So we moved a lot of stuff to India and China, as you might imagine. Some stuff back, depended on, honestly, on the business case. And I ended up actually relevant to these times, learning a lot about remote teams. Moved something from Ohio to India and failed miserably for a bunch of reasons and didn't really have enough trust in the remote team. So remedied that when I lived in Cardiff, of all places, and moved some stuff to China. But long story short, spent a number of years doing that at GE. And what I really loved about that is I loved the people and kind of getting to know that side of it. But I also realized that all the jobs I loved were ambiguous. They wasn't sure what the next thing was and weren't sure how to build it. They were like, go figure it out. And that didn't really look like the rest of structured GE supply chain. And so thought I should do something different and didn't know what that would look like and didn't have any money, or I probably would have gap yeared. Also, similar to Anthony, I am also a traveler. So I ended up just going back to business school. I did my MBA at Harvard, and I thought if I like ambiguity, I might like startups. So I just cold emailed someone in India, and I had been traveling there a bit, mostly on late night phone calls, and moved to Bangalore for 3 months, worked for a startup there, loved it, and thought maybe this is just a fluke, or maybe this means something.
Just stop there, Mira. You went to Bangalore to join a startup?
Yes, in 2011.
That's somewhat unusual, but...
Yeah, to be honest, it was kind of all an experiment. I was like, I think if I like this ambiguity thing, I had no idea. I mean, to be honest, I grew up in Wisconsin and I spent the first 4 years of my career in supply chain, and I'd done some study abroad in Australia and spent a summer in Germany when I was 16, but I didn't have a lot of exposure to different industries. So I had no idea what like a startup looked like at the time. Yeah. I only found this woman because we had been doing stuff in India, and I found her actually of all places on the GE intranet. And I just cold emailed her and said, this looks cool. Can I come work for you for free? And she's like, sure. Yeah, it was lovely. And I had traveled to India a bit with GE, but honestly, like you're busy with work and meetings and everyone wants to be like, you're in air conditioned cars and 5-star hotels. And I wanted to like really see the energy of the place and argue with the rickshaw driver and be on the ground and explore myself. And it was amazing, honestly.
Wow.
But I was, as I was saying, I kind of was traveling, but getting other people to pay for my travel because I didn't have any money at the time. So then between these 4 years, I moved to Brazil. And I worked for a tech accelerator there. And basically that was the second time I was around early stage startups. And I was like, this is my jam. These people are amazing. I love this something from nothing thing. I was learning Portuguese. I tried to co-found a company for the next year with one of those teams. Still in business school. So like for all the founders out there, I don't really count it as a real co-founding experience. You're not giving up the same thing, but I did learn a lot nonetheless. And then I ended up after business school joining an AdTech startup in New York, scaled with them from 12 to 125 people, from like 0 to 40 million in revenue, and then went over to venture. I had always stayed involved with founders on the side through nonprofit stuff, through other stuff. And one of my friends was like, you should probably just go into venture where you can help founders all the time on a regular basis. And I was like, that's a great idea. So I moved over to RRE, spent 5 years there in New York, actually first on the platform side, working with our companies post-investment, because I went in to help founders and broader teams actually, and then built a leadership program, did a lot of biz dev between the banks and our companies, and just fell in love with financial services and what was happening there. And so switched to the investing side, was doing that for a number of years, and then just recently moved to London. So I had my son 11 months ago, and it was an interesting moment to have a baby in the middle of pandemic. But because of that, what?
Congratulations.
Thank you. He's quite a cutie. Honestly, it was pretty serendipitous. During the pandemic, we came to visit his mom because she couldn't come because of the travel ban. And I kind of like, I was on a partner track at RE. And so that's a pretty long-term thing. And I was like, if we're going to do it, it's kind of now or never. And I talked to a number of funds and got super lucky. And the team at Kindred was incredible. So joined and got lucky, honestly, with a visa because of Brexit. And so it all serendipitously lined up and moved here in December. That's how I got to Kindred.
There you go.
So the stars align. And just from my understanding, I probably am showing my ignorance of the US VC or investment scene a bit here. RE, is that short for a particular VC, or is that the name of
it's the name of the VC, RRE, yeah.
And there, I imagine a pretty big VC, or
yeah. So it's a seed and A fund out of New York, been around since 1994. Kindred is a little bit earlier stage, but generalist fund. Yeah.
The move to Kindred and Kindred compared to RE, are they similar type VCs in their outlook, size of investment, stage, or is it chalk and cheese?
No, I think that they're similar in a way, right? And I don't think Kindred would have hired me if I couldn't like at least prove that I really loved and had some track record in early stage investing. But I would say RRE was more of a Series A fund, whereas Kindred is earlier. It's pre-seed and seed. We would do some seed at RRE, but it was not the bread and butter. It was just usually to lead to A. It's similar in the sense that it's a generalist fund. And so both are generalist funds. Kindred's a little bit earlier. And I would say both are very high conviction, right? So like it's not like a spray and pray model where you put in a lot of checks and do a lot of things. You really have high conviction to do a certain number of deals a year that is pretty limited. And then you work very closely if the founders want, right? Like sometimes serial entrepreneurs tend to want you to go away and answer the phone call when they want help. First-time founders tend to want you to be more helpful, but it just depends on the relationship that you create with the founder. But in general, if the founders want us to be more helpful, we'd like to be. And so that's kind of that's true of both funds.
It's an interesting model with Kindred with the carry points pool, so like an option pool for the fund for founders. I was wondering if you could explain a bit more about that for the viewers and listeners.
Sure. I mean, I think everyone at Kindred has been an operator in the past. We've either started our own companies or scaled with startups. And I think that there's just like an acknowledgement and sort of a humility or empathy around the fact that the founder journey is extremely hard. It's over glorified these days, honestly, but like it's very hard. Even if the numbers are up and to the right, which they're not always, it never feels like that. Half the days you feel like you're getting hit in the face with a ton of bricks, and then other days you're on the top of a mountain, but there's probably more brick days than mountain days for sure. But it's just a very challenging journey. And so we wanted to help enable founders and their teams in that journey in a number of ways. So I would say one is that we actually underwrite coaching for our founders for the first year. And then we have these founder forums where they can connect to each other. And then the third thing we do is that we have this equitable venture model, which is really just about connecting in our broader community. So I think there's this concept like VCs put in money and they help. And it's much more of a familial game, right? Like I think we help our founders, they help us. It's like we ask them to do diligence calls with LPs and recommend us to other founders. It's very much like a network-based like industry, honestly. And so we wanted to give them some of the upside in the fund that we're creating because they are a part of that fund, right? And also their economical interests are so aligned to one outcome that giving them a little bit of diversification is super helpful as well. So that's kind of why we thought about doing it. And it's actually the vast majority of it does go to founders, but there's also a percentage that goes to other people in the community to some extent. Like we have an advisor network and things like that. So we really believe in the community approach here.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it logically, it follows a lot of the same logic of having an employee option pool at your startup, right? It incentivize everybody to be bought into the company for the long term and, go the extra mile and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's very cool.
Exactly.
Then the vertical bias is that I think I picked up, you said you're a generalist, but I know some VCs a very narrow generalization sometimes. So
when I was looking at the portfolio online, it almost seemed to me like more of a futurist than a generalist. There's some really cool things in there: quantum computing, flying cars, robotics, software for self-driving, quantum secure cryptographic solutions. It's very interesting stuff.
I think Anthony's pitching for a job here, Maria.
He's doing a good job. So yeah, I mean, we definitely don't shy away from deep technology at all. So we've done some pretty frontier stuff, as you said, especially in biotech or in AI and machine learning. There's different categories where we've gone deeper on the frontier tech. I do some stuff in crypto as well. I think we are truly generalists in the sense of the word. I think there is a trend right now where everybody's specializing, and we do have depth in certain areas in the team. Like I look at everything. I just did a deal in consumer, but I spend a lot of time in fintech because I just like it a lot. One of my partners, Chris, spends a lot of time in enterprise, but Lyall has done a lot of stuff in biotech, but also she doesn't do that. She does everything, right? Like I think we are truly generalists. Like I think there are funds that really go deep by vertical, and that is a strategy that can work, especially at certain stages. But I think we're at the early stage and we just feel like you have to be in the best talent, and we are very, very founder driven. So we obviously have to be in a market we believe will be massive and successful, but we are very team driven. So we believe in backing the best founders. And so that's really any industry, honestly.
So spinning it around the other way, and one of the key themes that seems to be very prevalent in VC founder land at the moment is the whole concept of inclusivity. So if I was that quantum founder or crypto founder, I like the look of Kindred. How do I find Kindred, or how does Kindred find me, I suppose?
Yeah, combination. So I think there is the warm introduction thing that happens in VC, which is part of the problem with inclusivity, right? Like I'm very passionate about this. I helped co-found something in New York called NYC Blend, helping underrepresented founders access venture. And I'm actually involved in something that's launching in Europe very soon that I probably shouldn't mention yet. But
this is on an 8 to 10 week delay, so by the time it comes out it might be public, but just enough.
Can I say it and then you can decide? We can just decide if it's come out by then to edit it or not.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I'll say it and then we'll come back to it. So I'll start that answer over per se, and then I'll actually come back to your real question, which is, do we actually get to that person who doesn't know us? So I promise I won't politically divert the question. Yes.
That's the next career, Maria.
What?
That's the next career, Maria.
Politics.
Okay. So yes, we do think a lot about inclusivity. It is a real issue in the space. So I am very personally passionate about this. I helped co-found something in New York called NYC Blend, where we worked with other venture funds to help underrepresented founders who didn't have the network necessarily to get access to venture. I used to also do this thing with my cold outreach there, where people could answer a leadership question and get access to me to look at their deal, whether or not I knew them. We at Kindred are very passionate about that as a whole as well. And so we're actually engaged in a program that SoftBank and Speed Invest had started with other funds in Europe called Emerge. And it is basically a program to help get access for underrepresented founders directly to VCs across Europe. And they're leveraging funds to make sure that there's also capital at the table. And it's not just about kind of creating introductions that potentially don't go anywhere, but I think the introductions is also just beyond like, look at my pitch. It's how do you create relationships? So I think your broader question is like, there's a lot of warm introductions in VC, which is how the job is done. I don't know a way around that. But there's actually someone, Dell from Backstage Capital, who says a lot that the warm intros is the problem with diversity and inclusion in VC, and I don't think he's wrong. So we also have inbound on our webpage, and it does get looked at, right? We don't just like, you will get an automatic message if you respond to it, but we have a process in the team by which certain people review it at certain days, and everyone looks through what comes through that, and we will respond to that. And I've already seen that multiple times since I've been here. So I think we are mindful of how we get deals, to your point. But it is a real challenge that needs a lot of work for it to get better, quite frankly. And I think that we think a lot about connecting people, underrepresented founders, to VCs at the moment that they're raising, and there is value in that. But as part of the NYC Blend efforts, we interviewed 100 underrepresented founders and VCs, and also found that there's just a challenge that there's not a social network to begin with, right? So it's like, it's about kind of having a conversation before you're raising, where you realize that you both like tennis or something, or you both drink the same tea or whatever, but like creating these social moments. Sorry, I'm a big tea drinker. So these moments that are not just about a transactional, are you raising now? And I think that makes a difference. So I'm sure you'll see us start to play with that more, but it's a real problem, and it's something we're thinking about.
It's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? Kind of, as you're saying, because you kind of have to have the relationship and be able to have access to, the club in order to get the warm intro. But, if you don't have any of those connections, it's a bit of an uphill battle. So efforts like that are really important, I think. Yeah.
And the other thing that I think sometimes people don't think about as much is you can also create warm intros in a pretty short period of time. So like when I was breaking into venture, I didn't know anyone in venture, right? I was at a startup, but it wasn't really like, it was backed by European founders or VCs actually in New York. And so I ended up basically applying to all these jobs I got declined by to meet half of the venture industry. And I think it takes time, but you can build some of those networks. And I think it's also not about just that connection, but also about how do you help navigate them through the process, right? So how do you also help an underrepresented founder or someone who's not as connected to 17 other founders who've taken venture money to say, how do I negotiate the term sheet? What should I do when these two VCs ask me to do this at once? Is this fair? Is this not fair? What's the normal? It's kind of like a language, right? And if you don't have someone to teach you at least the basics, then you're really not on a level playing field anyway, even if you get the introduction.
Well, that's what I thought was one of the advantages of sort of the Silicon Valley approach with the pay it forward mentality, which I think really helped to accelerate the ecosystem in Silicon Valley or California. Because if everybody's paying it forward, then everybody kind of moves forward together. So we've seen some evidence of that happening here in London, but sort of efforts like that are crucial, I think.
Yeah, I think the talent cycle does as companies grow, it does really help. But I also think that I think the Valley in some ways does that. In other ways, it's not at all diverse because there's sort of everyone in the same bubble in a way too. So I think each ecosystem has its own challenges. I think Europe is very disparate. So it's really hard for the average entrepreneur maybe in the middle of Poland to know what Kindred might like. And so the other thing we haven't talked about in this story yet, which is part of the equation to your outbound question, is data. So we've actually started using a lot more data for our outbound sourcing, which is something we're heavily investing in going into the next few years. And so I think that does also help. If you combine a mixture of inbound and outbound, I think there is more likelihood that you would break down some of those.
I wanted to dig into the aspect of, again, the RE, the Kindred, not link, but you've had experience of USVC. There's obviously a big chatter in all the tech press about, the Americans are coming, they're setting up camp, and I know various big US VCs have either venture scouts or more of a presence in London and are looking to accelerate. Do you see that in your work, Maria? Do you have some of the US VCs that you may have known in the past or people that are new to London engaging with you more?
Absolutely. It's interesting. I've been joking that I didn't bring the good weather until the last day, but I brought the valuations because the valuations they here have really just, I thought that I was going to get, some sort of valuation arbitrage by coming to Europe, and the speed and valuations are just, crazier than they've ever been and probably will continue to be so. But you see way more American funds playing in Europe, either directly with teams on the ground, expanding their teams, or through scout networks, or just directly deal by deal. I think one thing that the pandemic changed is that global has a whole different meaning now, right? And where you used to say, I could never be on that board because I'm not going to fly to Zimbabwe once every quarter, you can now decide you want to be on a board anywhere. And so I think that it does open the doors, but I think that was happening before the pandemic. There's just the European tech scene is hitting a maturity where there are really interesting companies spinning out at a very high velocity, and wherever you have that, you will have venture funds follow, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and on that point of valuation, can you expand a bit on the price rise, I suppose, that you've seen?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I should find, there was a chart that someone sent around the other day that had some really good figures around it, but I think seed went from like on average a few years ago, like at 4 or 5 to almost like 10 or 12 as a pre-seed valuation, or I don't know if it's pre or post actually money, but it's gone up substantially in the last 3 years, but it even ballooned much further at like the Series C and beyond. It's ballooned in Europe, it's ballooned in the US. I think that, I mean, for founders, I think it's great, right? Less dilutive capital as a founder is the best. I think for the VC model, it is challenging sometimes, right? Because we typically write like $1 million check, and we usually lead around and have a certain percentage ownership with that. And I think sometimes it's for like a VC, an entrepreneur should never care about my VC model, right? But I still have to make my VC model work, and I take money from LPs. And if there's a pension fund in there, someone doesn't get their retirement if I don't actually deliver a return as a fund. We don't. And so I think that there is a real challenge in these like 5, 6 million, 8 million seed rounds that get done in 2 days. But we work through that and think through how our model has to evolve. And at the end of the day, if you're not evolving your model, like for me, a large majority of venture works, but a bunch of it is totally broken. And so like one of the reasons why I was excited to join Kindred is just thinking through, I think everyone is thinking through a shared vision of how do we adapt to the market going forward, and how do we make sure that as things change, we're ready to change with them.
do you think the whole incremental VC space is well, in the next, I suppose, 3 to 5 years is going to become a much bigger asset class with many more people, much bigger funds, global funds? Just kind of interested in hearing, perhaps slightly sort of looking out into the future, but what would your thoughts be on the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's been ballooning as an asset class. I think that that's kind of tempered by by LP appetite for VC funds. And I think there was like more first-time venture funds raised than ever before, I think in 2020 and in 2019. So I do think you're going to keep seeing proliferation of funds where people have great track record. They can continue to raise bigger funds. But I do think it's getting harder for first-time managers right now. There's just so much capital that I think I'm seeing LPs be a little bit more hesitant to write that new check into that first new manager. But if you have a prior track record, you're still getting it. You're still getting funded. And so I do think people will continue to raise more money. There will continue to be capital. I think it might that's what's making it more and more competitive, right? If there was less capital chasing the deals, it wouldn't be as competitive as it is right now. And I don't see that going away in the future. I do think the dynamics at different stages might change, meaning a lot of these growth stage funds, like there was this article that got sent around to a lot of people that we can include in the links below or whatever, but about Tiger Global and how the way Tiger Global is behaving is affecting growth stage funds. And I think a lot of growth stage funds right now are frustrated by what's happening. But then there was a great article that got sent around saying that like, it's just a different strategy, right? And so like, it is what it is, but it's a different strategy. And so you have to react to it. And I think at the seed and pre-seed, we still think there's a lot of local benefit to being local, but it is a much more global world to invest into. So we invest all over Europe, but we've also had the debate with ourselves of like, should we invest anywhere in the world? What does it really mean? And what does it look like to partner with people these days? And I think everyone's asking that question.
Well, especially if your goal is to get outsized returns via the power law, you have to, be changing up your strategy to make sure that you're not just getting into lots of average companies, because then you won't get the outsized return.
Yeah, that's a good point. The European picture is certainly something. We when I worked at Bloomberg, we used to cover like different pockets, and we'd have delegations of Eastern European startups coming to London, and we'd kind of introduce them to the whole community here. It was fascinating, and again, that slowed down a bit in the pandemic. Hopefully, we'll come back, but it might not even need to come back, because I think a lot of these centres like Poland, Ukraine. Amazing tech scenes. Obviously, we have our problem with Brexit. That means that people aren't so keen to obviously relocate here, but now they probably don't need to. And I mean, if you look at it through a Kindred lens, are there, are you seeing a lot of particular upswings in entrepreneurs from Spain, Italy, France? Is there a country that's hot at the moment, or many?
I I think that what's funny is VCs tend to follow exits. So, after UiPath was hot, then everyone was going to Romania, but what are you going to do? I think that I'm looking everywhere. So I do think, though, to your point, like I want to be in person in some of these bigger ecosystems in Europe to really build relationships. And so that's definitely something I'm planning to do when it's easier to travel. I do think the local ecosystems in each country in Europe has been getting better. And so I think that's helping. And then there's the international kind of pan-European VCs. I do think it's important for founders to usually talk to both, just because there's sometimes like some strange behavior, I'll say, on the local side. Like as an example, I was just talking to, well, there's different cultural norms as well. So sometimes like certain cultures might pitch themselves in a very different way than a UK founder would. And so I need to be mindful of that, which I am. I should also be more mindful of the fact that I speak a million miles a minute. And not English is not everyone's first language. And so that's something I'm actively working on, but that's been like a problem my entire life, even for my American friends. So, but I think that like there was a real case, I'll protect the person's confidentiality, so I won't give too much color, but there was a different country in Europe where there was different cultural norms. And I was talking to a female founder there and we got really close to doing the deal and we didn't. And then she was sharing her experience talking to local VCs in that country. And it was shocking to me, the questions they were asking her. I mean, she was talking to me with like a newborn of 2 weeks, every pitch meeting. And she was raising for her company, which like, I just found like, I'm not, everyone should take the proper maternity leave they need, obviously. But she was just like a force of nature, just doing her thing and whatever, I'm not going to judge it either way, but she got a lot of questions from the local VCs like, oh, how are you going to be a mother? And had run a company, like, don't you need to be full-time? And I was just like, my mind was blown.
Things that would result in a lawsuit in the US, right? Just being asked nonchalantly.
Especially in 2021, are you kidding me? Like, you got to be kidding me. And like, she's like 90% of the pitch was like, are you sure you can be a founder? And I was like, what? And like, she's already created this incredible business and built a business before that, by the way. So like, I think that there are cultural norms that play into this from the VC side and also from how you pitch that you need to be mindful of too. But it's just, you have more of that complexity in Europe that you have to be aware of.
Yes, so next question, Maria, on again the VC, the industry. I've been fascinated in these podcasts and podcasts about the scale of operations, and I mean when I talk about scale, it's the sort of incoming funnel, and then how that translates into, we have X amount of decks, we have Y amount of review, and then the committee works like this. So it's a slightly staccato question, but I'm just with Kindred, how do you approach that mountain?
Yeah, so I don't know a number of decks that would be higher because I don't track that, but on meetings, so I tend to take about 400 to 500 first meetings a year. And I mean, this what you're talking about now is like literally one of the most challenging parts of the job, because I meet about 400 to 500 companies personally myself, and most of all of our team does that on their own as well. And I will personally invest in about 2 companies a year, and our fund as a whole invests in 7 to 8 a year. So that is, to your point, like basically 400 to 500 people that I meet with. And the crazy part is like, it's not like these are bad founders. You're like, no, a lot of times, like, I think they're incredible people doing incredible things, but the bar of what we invest in is just very specific. And it's very few things you invest in a year. And so it has to be all the right things. But I think that, but often there's people that I pass on that I just like, I genuinely just know that they'll be really successful and want them to be really successful. And, but you have to pass on them in a way that they still tell other founders you should talk to them, right? So in some ways, It's actually a lot of it is like you're going to invest in the companies, and people will associate your brand and your track record with the companies that you end up investing in and being known to be around, right? And being helpful to. But I think equally, a lot of your VC is a very reputation game, and I think that I think just being a good human, unfortunately, being a good human is actually like clears the bar far and away more than it should in this industry, right? Like, sometimes we have founders give us really positive feedback. We do an NPS score. So every month or quarter after we pass on deals, we send an email to people we passed on to ask them what we could do better, what they would rate us, how they, all of that. That's good. But it's good. But it's interesting because I think that just being responsive, right? Saying yes or no, setting a meeting, showing up when you said you're going to set in a meeting, having looked at the deck.
Being accessible, definitely.
Yeah. But then also when you pass, right? I think there's a lot of incentive in this industry to take an option call, to say, I'm not going to tell someone no, because maybe their round's going to pick up and then I'm going to want to be in because there's FOMO. And like, if I say no, I lose the chance. But I mean, I guess we at Kindred just don't believe in that at all. And just don't think that's good for founders. And so like, we always say no. Like if I have ever ghosted a founder, it has been an accident or something got caught in spam or something. But like, we say no and we say why we say no. But it is, to your point, the scale is pretty massive. Yeah, and I don't also let founders ghost me. 2 of them tried once to track them down. But generally, I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm just like the wrong generation. Maybe all the 20-year-olds out there are like, oh my God, you don't know what you're doing. But like, I was never in the dating world when you just like didn't ever respond to someone. And I'm like, no, like, you know, if you ask
just leaving people on red, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also it's like, I think it's hard because we meet so many companies, but it's really important to remember how big of a deal it is for the founder, right? It's like, don't want to waste their time, right? Like they just want to know, like, are you going to invest in me or not? And if not, don't waste my time. And if you can help me, help me. That's it. Like, don't, you know, drag me along in this process to learn something and move on. Like it's not you getting their time. So I think it is a challenge at the scale, but you have to do it in a way that is reasonably human, I would say.
And so if the founder gets to that the final hurdle or the last mile, is it then everyone in Kindred has to give it the thumbs up, or is it 2 out of
No,
10?
we vote. So we vote. You can't vote a 5 or 6. So you have to vote 1 through 10. So you either have to pick a 4 or 7. So you're leaning one way or the other. All the GPs vote. Our process is like you meet with one partner first, then you meet with 2 more partners in the next meeting, and then the following meeting with 2 more. And then we do this thing called a working session where you like bring a problem you're thinking through anyway, because at that point people have already seen the pitch a million times, right? And so they've seen it before the meetings. So you bring a problem that you're working through and we talk through it with you. And then there's pretty much an investment or not. And in the backdrop of those meetings, we're doing our own homework on the market and other things that we're diligencing. Usually for each deal, it's kind of clear the 1 or 2 things that we want to understand more. And then I do something different than I've always done this at RE or Kindred. It's not really part of either firm's process, but it's always part of my process where I go deeper with the teams when we're really close to investing. I spend about 90 minutes actually, which is a lot with this 500 thing, that we just talked before, going deeper on the personal side with the founders. So deeper understanding who they are as a person, but also what is their leadership style, how to think about being a leader, how to think about culture. I share my story because VCs should also be thinking about who they're working with. But we just go much deeper on the who are we as people and leaders and how do we show up.
And have you ever got to that point? So speaking RE and Kindred, you've got to that point where you've then done those 90-minute sessions and gone, I'm not.
I don't
right.
like this person
I'm
anymore.
Not right.
Yeah,
I don't like them.
Sometimes that is the end of it for me. It depends. And then I'm usually honest about why. But sometimes it's also like not something, sometimes it's just not a fit. Like someone will be like, this is what I want out of VC, and it's just totally different to what we do, right? But usually it's that session of itself is less of a like binary yes or no. It's more of a like get to know each other to see if we're going to work together, how it works. And it also helps me understand like ways to work with that founder going forward, or maybe things that I check in the reference calls. Like it just gives you a bit more color, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's an important final step because, you know, those relationships can last over 10 years, right? So if you get in a bad feeling, you know, from the outset, it's probably better not.
All the preparation for this.
In your experience again, Maria, of perhaps more RE, that when you have then decided to invest, be part of that company's makeup, infrastructure, the way forward, do you find that there's a really big initial in the first year or second or first 2 years, you're very involved and then it kind of starts to diminish a bit because they may get more investors, bigger rounds, other people involved? How does that dynamic work?
A bit of a preface to this question, because it's something that I wanted to dive into. Can you explain a bit more for, you know, the audience what it means to be, you know, looking after the platform and post investment? Because we've not had a guest on yet that's really been in that kind of role, so people might not be familiar with what's actually involved in that.
Yeah, so I think that there's a ton of incredible platform professionals out there, by the way, but I think it depends on your strategy. So like when I was at RRE, we had a whole leadership program and we did a lot of business development for our portfolio companies to connect them to potential clients in the Fortune 500. At Kindred, we have someone named Liz who runs our platform. She's amazing. So she runs a lot of what I mentioned before with our founders for coaching and founder forums, but also she creates events for CFOs and heads of talent amongst the portfolio, right? She does a lot of things to create community there, but everything from like strategic stuff like that to, hey, I want a compensation benchmark. I want to know how much to pay this person, or I'm looking for a press firm. What do I do here? So there's a mixture of inbound and outbound there. I think that to answer your question about how we support, so we take a board seat and we're on until usually a few rounds later when there's more people on the board, and we usually just then roll off. I think it's not so much about the boards. Like it's in my experience, how deeply involved you are with a founder is just depends on your relationship with that founder, and honestly has nothing to do with your stage or when you. There is some more formal stuff that happens for people as they grow. Yeah, there's more VCs involved, etc. But I think that it depends on like part of why I do the session where you kind of get to know each other more is also to understand like what you want. Like I think I said at the beginning, like a lot of times first time founders actually do want you to be very on call for things that they have questions for. And half the time I won't have an answer to that, but I can definitely point them to someone who can give them a really good perspective, right? And a lot of times serial founders are like, just get out of my way, but do the thing when I ask you, like when you have this one high quality intro that I want, make it, right? And make it well. But like, I think that you really set the tone. So, I mean, I'm still in touch with all the people I invested in when I was at RE, and I'd say that it just depends on the vibe, right? I have people who call me, and there's founders who I talk to every 2 days, and there's founders who I talk to every 2 weeks. And, you know, it just depends on what. I think the best founders, vet the VC and really make a decision on purpose of who they're going to work with. And it's not just about the brand, because the brand can be a lot of things, but it's like, who's the individual person that's showing up and working with you? And then second, the best like entrepreneurs I see know what to get out of their VC. So like, I think back on the companies I worked with for years, and they've learned over time where they think I'm really valuable and where they think I'm not. And so like, they call me, and I know they call me when they have questions that they think I can actually be helpful with, right? And I'm sure that they call someone else on their cap table or another founder when it's a question that I'm not very valuable at, right? So I think you got to be very selfish as a founder on those things. Like the best way to do is like be absolutely selfish on like, what do I need? And let me get it where I can get it, and let me ignore it if it's not valuable to me. Like no one has enough time to wait, right?
100%.
We always ask people what their picks are on the various streaming channels. If there's, you know, because obviously we then go and watch them ourselves that weekend.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something I'm struggling with right now. I think you just enlisted half of my last coaching session. Working mom life, I will steal from another mom. I've been ungracefully balancing the two. I think like being a mom is amazing. Having a job I love and work a lot of hours in is amazing. Doing the two together, much less amazing. I'm still working on it. So I don't have a lot of free time. I'm trying to craft things around so I don't just email and do things all night, and I can take a bath here or there, or enjoy a craft beer with my husband and watch some Netflix for sure. But yeah, I would say that the hours of free time are limited, but I mostly just fill them with my son, which is amazing. So, and Netflix, we do watch stuff. So we're currently watching Devils, which is a show about some bankers with the guy from Supernova, if you watch that. But I think my favorite thing in the last 2 years has been Money Heist or Casa de Papel. So if anyone has not checked that out, I highly recommend it. And I just started rewatching Modern Family again because it's
wow. I can't find the last season anywhere though. Nobody's got it. Yeah.
Modern Family.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Well, at least Netflix doesn't.
Really great to meet you. I've really enjoyed the time we spent on the VOD, and you know, I look forward to seeing you, meeting you in person in the future, hopefully, and you know, keep up the great work, because it sounds like you're an amazing tour de force at Kindred. So well done.
I don't know about that. We're trying, just having fun while we're doing it. Thank you. And thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to meet you in person. It's gonna be great one of these days.